Imagine an empire that once sprawled across fertile valleys and misty mountains, a civilization so meticulously organized. It left no trace of its people behind. No bodies, no tombs, no inscriptions to mark the passing of life. How could such an entity exist, flourish, and then vanish, leaving behind only the faintest echoes of its presence? This is the paradox of the Forgotten Empire. A civilization whose disappearance challenges our understanding of history, psychology, and human perception. What does it mean when a vast social network of interconnected lives simply dissolves without leaving a record? Can its erasure teach us about the fragility of memory, collective consciousness, and society's adaptive machinery under extreme stress? In exploring this mystery, we are not just delving into the past. We are peering into the neural architecture of survival and the subtle algorithms of human behavior that govern both continuity and disappearance. This is a story of adaptation, perception, and the signals hidden in the silence of history. The empire, nameless in texts, is reconstructed through indirect evidence, patterns in landscape, settlement ruins, and traces in soil. Archaeologists detected precise urban planning implying central governance, trade routes radiating like neural pathways across a continent, and artifacts indicating a culture of sophisticated metallurgy, ceramics, and ritualized behavior. Yet, when excavators search for graves, cemeteries, ossuaries, or human remains, they find almost nothing. This absence, this deliberate invisibility, hints at an intentional societal structure or a catastrophic adaptive response to unknown pressures. Psychologically, it raises profound questions about how a society perceives mortality, continuity, and legacy. Were they concealing their dead as a survival strategy, or had social perception evolved where physical markers were irrelevant? Here, history intersects with neuroscience, where a civilization's collective brain might employ strategies mimicking neural pruning. Unnecessary or vulnerable nodes, human bodies could have been removed to protect the network's integrity. Consider the concept of collective stress responses in human populations. Modern neuropsychology teaches that stress propagates through social networks, modulating behaviors and altering risk assessments, sometimes triggering mass adaptive strategies in human populations. In this empire, an existential threat climactic shift, epidemic or invasion, acted as a high-frequency signal across the social brain. The population responded as a coherent system, adjusting settlement patterns, consumption behaviors, and mortuary practices. If every individual became a vector for risk, the response might have been a radical form of social survival. The total removal of traces that could invite predators, disease vectors, or hostile powers. In modern terms, it is analogous to an organism initiating apoptosis, the programmed death of cells to preserve the whole. The empire may have engaged in a cultural apoptosis, erasing corporeal evidence of its existence while maintaining operational continuity. Anthropologists suggest that human memory and perception are inherently tied to material artifacts, bones, monuments, and inscriptions. These function as external extensions of our cognitive architecture, anchoring memory in physical space. Yet, this civilization challenges that paradigm, demonstrating that cognition and societal continuity can decouple from tangible markers. If a social network can function, grow, and adapt without leaving physical evidence of individual lives, what does that imply? It suggests that a society can operate in a high-entropy mode, where redundancy in memory storage is internalized within living networks. Social rituals, oral histories, and ephemeral structures may have carried the continuity signal. Only under extreme stress did the system permit the deliberate elimination of nodes that were normally considered indispensable. The question then emerges, how much of what we call history is contingent upon what civilizations choose to preserve, versus what they sacrifice in order to endure? The patterns observed in this empire hint at a level of anticipatory cognition that borders on the systemic. Urban layouts resemble neural networks optimized for efficiency and security rather than aesthetic display. Trade routes intersect in ways that mirror the distribution of synaptic connections, balancing redundancy with resilience. Artifacts suggest a culture deeply attuned to perception. Mirrors, reflective surfaces, and optical illusions were common, perhaps as teaching tools or as metaphors for self-reflection. This attention to perception, combined with the absence of burial remains, indicates a sophisticated understanding of how visibility, memory, and knowledge propagate. Here, we see a civilization treating its own collective consciousness as a computational system, managing information flows and survival priorities with precision. Their hardware was flesh and bone, yet they seemed to understand that software, ritual, communication, and social coordination could operate independently. The adaptive strategies of this empire resonate with what behavioral economists and evolutionary psychologists describe as risk mitigation through decentralization and redundancy. In typical human societies, mortality leaves a permanent imprint, a signal that guides social learning. By suppressing or removing these signals, intentionally or through catastrophe, the empire forced its members to develop alternative cognitive and social heuristics. The absence of bodies meant that generational memory had to rely on storytelling, symbolic objects, and mnemonic systems embedded in daily life. It is as if the civilization externalized memory into ephemeral processes rather than permanent monuments. Modern neuroscience shows that humans excel at pattern recognition and predictive modeling, but these capacities are usually scaffolded by environmental constants, including the permanence of death. By removing these constants, the empire may have accelerated the development of abstract thought, creating a population that perceived risk, mortality, and adaptation in ways alien to more tangible societies. The brain of this empire, collectively considered, was a high-dimensional simulator, constantly predicting outcomes without the usual anchors of corporeal evidence. Interestingly, the erasure of physical bodies may have produced a paradoxical strengthening of social cohesion. In social network theory, vulnerabilities are often concentrated at highly visible nodes, such as leaders, priests, or elders. The absence of these nodes, whether due to intentional removal or environmental pressures, compels the network to operate more distributedly, enhancing robustness against collapse. Similarly, in neural networks, pruning of certain connections can increase efficiency and prevent runaway excitation. Could it be that this empire, by eliminating or concealing its dead, inadvertently or perhaps deliberately enhanced its resilience? History provides cryptic hints. After periods of disappearance, certain knowledge, technologies, or trade patterns re-emerge in neighboring regions, suggesting that the system's underlying information was preserved and transmitted, even as individual corporeal markers vanished. This evokes the image of a forest fire, which destroys visible biomass but enriches the soil, facilitating new growth. The absence of bodies, the very symbol of mortality, may have been the engine of the empire's hidden survival. From a philosophical perspective, the empire challenges our assumptions about the permanence of existence and the linearity of history. We tend to believe that to understand a civilization, we must uncover its tombs, its monuments, its inscriptions. Yet here is an entity that forces us to redefine the criteria of survival. Perhaps what matters more than the physical trace is the integrity of information, the coherence of social processes, and the capacity to transmit learning. This leads to a subtle but profound realization. Civilizations are not reducible to their material artifacts. They are processes, dynamic systems in which adaptation, perception, and collective cognition are the primary currencies. Bodies, while significant, are sometimes expendable to the greater algorithm of societal continuity. The Forgotten Empire embodies this principle, demonstrating that in certain conditions, the ephemeral and the intangible can outlast stone and bone. The absence of bodies also reframes our understanding of ritual, morality, and memory. Without graves to decorate or ossuaries to consecrate, the empire may have developed alternative modes of ethical and mnemonic reinforcement. Ceremonies, symbolic acts, and behavioral codifications could have substituted for physical memorialization. Cognitive science suggests that humans can internalize ethical norms more effectively when they are embedded in routine and narrative. Rather than static monuments, this implies that the empire's disappearance from the material record may not indicate annihilation, but rather a profound shift in the medium of memory. The collective psyche of the society was optimized for abstraction, an adaptation, possibly making it more flexible in responding to environmental or social perturbations. If so, the empire's ultimate lesson is not one of loss, but of the plasticity and resilience of human systems. Yet the enigma persists. Why did no bodies survive? Was this a deliberate societal decision, a response to a deadly epidemic, or the result of environmental cataclysms that rendered traditional burial impossible? Some theories propose rapid depopulation through disease, famine, or conflict. coupled with cremation, scattering, or concealment practices that left no recoverable remains. Others suggest that burial practices were symbolic, integrating the deceased into the environment in ways that evade archaeological detection. Ritualized composting, river dispersal, or ephemeral markers that decay completely within decades. Each hypothesis points to a sophisticated understanding of survival, perception, and the limits of human cognition. In effect, the empire anticipated what modern disaster preparedness, epidemiology, and network science are only beginning to formalize. That the survival of the collective sometimes demands counterintuitive strategies, including the erasure of individual signals. Modern analogs can be drawn in the field of distributed systems and cybernetics. When designing networks that must survive attacks or failures, engineers often remove or anonymize nodes to prevent systemic collapse. The Forgotten Empire appears to have instinctively applied such principles, suggesting that collective human intelligence can manifest not only in technological ingenuity, but also in the subtle orchestration of mortality, perception, and social cohesion. In neural terms, the civilization seems to have executed a form of anticipatory pruning, eliminating potential sources of vulnerability, while preserving the information architecture necessary for long-term survival. This aligns with theories in evolutionary psychology that societies optimize for group-level fitness, sometimes at the expense of individual permanence. The empire's vanishing corpses, rather than representing failure, may therefore symbolize the apex of strategic social intelligence, a deliberate and adaptive response encoded in culture and cognition. As we reflect on this, the empire challenges us to reconsider the markers of existence and success. We often equate visibility with vitality, believing that what leaves traces in stone, text, or artifact has enduring significance. Yet the Forgotten Empire shows that influence can be subtle, embedded in networks, behaviors, and adaptive strategies, rather than tangible remains. The real signal may lie in the patterns left behind: trade disruptions, changes in settlement, shifts in neighboring cultures. Rather than the physical bodies themselves, the civilization becomes a metaphor for hidden resilience. A reminder that history is not solely written by what is preserved, but also by what is strategically erased. The silence of the earth, devoid of bodies, becomes a signal in itself, an enigmatic testament to the empire's mastery over its environment, its perception, and its collective destiny. In contemplating this lost society, we are also confronted with questions about our own world. Modern civilization produces vast quantities of data, artifacts, and monuments, yet we remain vulnerable to sudden systemic shocks. Pandemics, climate change, or geopolitical collapse. Could lessons from the Forgotten Empire inform how we think about resilience, adaptation, and the prioritization of information over mere visibility? Could a society survive by embracing abstraction, ephemeral memory, and distributed cognition? Neuroscience and systems theory suggest that networks thrive, not by preserving every element indefinitely, but by managing redundancy, optimizing pathways, and occasionally letting nodes vanish. The Forgotten Empire may have intuitively realized this principle long before it was formalized in science, leaving behind a paradoxical legacy, a civilization that survives in theory, pattern, and influence, even as its physical constituents disappeared. Ultimately, the empire's story is a meditation on impermanence, cognition, and the subtle interplay between individual existence and collective survival. It compels us to reconsider our definitions of mortality, legacy, and the nature of historical evidence. Perhaps true survival is not measured in bones or monuments, but in the integrity of adaptive processes, the resilience of information flow, and the coherence of social perception. The empire's vanishing bodies are not an absence, but a signal, a lesson encoded in silence, urging us to think differently about how humans organize, adapt, and endure. It is a reminder that history, like the brain, is a dynamic system. Memory is selective, perception is distributed, and the most profound signals often emerge not from what is visible, but from what has been intentionally erased. As we close this exploration, consider this. If a civilization can vanish physically yet endure cognitively, what does it say about our own efforts to leave a mark? How much of what we build, preserve, and memorialize is truly essential to the survival of our collective knowledge and culture? The Forgotten Empire challenges us to perceive history not merely as a catalog of monuments and bones, but as a living adaptive network responsive to stress, resilient through abstraction, and capable of profound strategic intelligence. Its lesson is both humbling and inspiring. The survival of the collective may require us to embrace impermanence, to prioritize systems over individuals, and to recognize that sometimes disappearance is the most sophisticated form of persistence. If this journey through the echoes of a vanished empire has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to leave your thoughts in the comments. Share your theories about how such a society could operate and what lessons we might draw for our own civilization. Like this video if it expanded your perspective on history and human behavior, and subscribe to Passlens to explore more tales, where science, philosophy, and history converge to reveal the hidden patterns of our past. Together, we can trace the silent signals of civilizations long gone, and in doing so, learn more about the resilience, fragility, and ingenuity of human societies.